Explosions ripped the Italian sky apart as men screamed, threw themselves into mud, and felt bullets tear through uniforms and flesh, the air thick with smoke, burning wood, and the acrid tang of cordite. Above it all, the Abbey of Monte Cassino rose like a shattered god, ancient walls cracked and blackened by the first bombs, still watching centuries of history collapse into dust, while below, the valley became a funnel of death, every step forward a gamble with fate itself. Americans, French, New Zealanders, Indians, soldiers from every corner of the globe clawed through rivers turned red with blood, dragged the wounded over rocks and barbed wire, fired blindly into machine gun nests that seemed to grow out of the very mountain, their boots slipping in mud that sucked at their legs like quicksand. The German Fallschirmjäger, elite and invisible, moved among the rubble with deadly patience, every shot precise, every ambush planned to perfection, and with every advancing platoon, the mountain demanded more sacrifice, more screams swallowed by the thunder of artillery that shook the hill to its roots. February 15th, 1944, brought the sky itself down. Over 200 Allied bombers carved through clouds and dropped 1,000 tons of explosives onto the Abbey, turning centuries of stone and history into rubble, hurling men through the air, deafening the valley. And when the dust cleared, the cruelest truth revealed itself. The Germans had never been inside, but now the ruins provided them cover that no artillery could destroy. Men fought hand-to-hand through debris, knives and grenades slick in their bloodied hands, screams mingling with the roar of mortars, while medics ran into hell to drag the dying away, slipping over shattered stones, slipping through the chaos that seemed endless. Gurkhas stormed the wreckage with machetes. Polish exiles charged at bunkers that seemed to appear and vanish in smoke. New Zealanders hurled themselves into the storm of fire. Americans hurled themselves into the gap where comrades had just fallen. The rain turning everything into sludge. The wind carrying the stench of burning flesh and earth across the valley. For months, Monte Cassino refused to fall. Every assault was met with bullets, mines, and mortars, the mountain claiming bodies faster than they could be carried away, hope fading with each failed attempt, despair settling like a fog over the surviving troops. And yet, even in this unending nightmare, men climbed, crawled, and fought, sometimes alone, sometimes in small bands, gripping rocks with bloodied fingers, pulling friends from mud, firing rifles with arms that shook, hearts pounding as if to drown out the screams. Then, in May 1944, after 4 months of relentless slaughter, the Polish Second Corps, battered, exhausted, but unbroken, surged one final time, climbing through smoke, fire, and rubble, planting their flag atop the ruins, a symbol of victory so steeped in loss that even the open road to Rome felt empty, hollow, as if the mountain had devoured part of the world itself. Monte Cassino was no longer a hill, no longer simply a battlefield. It had become a crucible, a monument to endurance, to courage measured not in triumph, but in the raw, desperate act of climbing into hell, knowing the mountain itself wants you dead, and somehow, surviving anyway, bloodied, broken, but alive, leaving behind a valley of ghosts, ruins, and the echo of sacrifice that would never be forgotten. The ruins of Monte Cassino still smoked as the soldiers crept forward, boots crunching over shattered stone, ears straining for the faintest click of a sniper rifle or the hiss of a hidden mine. Beneath the skeletal remains of the Abbey, dark tunnels yawned like the mouths of some ancient beast, and whispers told of German command posts, secret caches of weapons, and dead men who would not stay buried. Polish troops led the way, bayonets ready, hearts hammering as the air thickened with the stench of wet earth, blood, and the acrid smoke of bombs that had fallen weeks before, the mountain groaning as if alive, threatening to collapse, to swallow men whole. Inside the rubble, shadows moved unnaturally. The walls seemed to lean, the staircases twisted, hiding ambushes the Germans had left like traps in a hunter's playground. And every step down meant leaving the open light behind for a darkness that carried death like a familiar friend. Mines, booby traps, and hidden machine gun nests turned the tunnels into a snake pit. Men shouted warnings, pulled comrades away from invisible lines of fire, while others crawled forward, knives in teeth, rifles at the ready, every sound amplified by the stone, every breath stolen by fear. Smoke from small fires coiled around shattered arches, sparks danced on the walls as shells smoldered, and the whispers of the dead seemed to echo louder than any command, while above, artillery shook the ruins, sending stones raining down, forcing the soldiers to duck, leap, and stumble, mud mixing with blood and sweat. Gurkhas led silent charges into rooms no bigger than coffins, hurling grenades with precision, slashing through German positions, while Polish engineers worked furiously to clear mines and set charges that could turn a hiding place into a tomb in seconds. Every corridor was a trap, every doorway a potential death sentence, yet the soldiers pressed on, dragging the wounded, whispering encouragement, praying silently to survive the infernal maze, feeling the weight of the mountain above, sensing that Monte Cassino itself watched them, testing them, challenging them. Hours stretched into days as men navigated the labyrinth, the wounded groaning, the dead silent, the air thick with dust, smoke, and the coppery scent of blood. Every step forward was a story of courage, every heartbeat a gamble, every shattered wall a reminder that the mountain had already claimed so many. And then, deeper in the ruins, they found the truth. German maps, hidden orders, ammunition stockpiles, the remnants of a command that had orchestrated every nightmare from below. And in that moment, the soldiers understood the scale of the trap, the brilliance of the enemy, and the sheer horror they had survived. By the time they emerged back into the open, the sun cutting through the smoke, the mountains silent once more, the men were ghosts themselves, eyes hollow, bodies broken, but hearts stubbornly alive. Monte Cassino had tested them, humiliated them, crushed them, yet it had also revealed the edge of human endurance, the cost of victory, hidden beneath centuries of stone, fire, and blood. And as the wind carried the faint echoes of artillery across the valley, every soldier knew one truth: the Abbey was gone, but its shadow would haunt them forever, a monument not just to history, but to the terror, courage, and survival that had defined the bloodiest hill in Italy. The valley below Monte Cassino burned with artillery fire, tracer rounds streaking like fiery snakes across the smoke-choked sky, and soldiers plunged into the chaos, boots sinking into mud that clung like blood-soaked tar, rifles cracking, grenades exploding, the screams of the wounded and dying blending into a symphony of hell. From every ruined building, German snipers picked off the brave, their bullets echoing through crumbled streets, bouncing off stones, ripping through men as though the mountain itself conspired with them, while the Allies clawed forward, inch by bloody inch, dragging stretchers, throwing themselves over fallen comrades, shouting orders that were almost drowned by the relentless roar of shells. Tanks lurched across the valley, their treads crushing rubble and corpses alike, smoke trailing behind them like the tails of angry beasts, and every turn revealed another ambush, another machine gun nest hidden in a collapsed wall or a burnt-out villa, forcing soldiers to dive, crawl, and charge with nothing but courage and desperation pushing them onward. The New Zealanders pushed through orchard after orchard, the olive trees shattered, the mud sprayed with blood as mortars fell in spirals of death, while Indian troops, silent and deadly, moved like shadows through ruins, tossing grenades with surgical precision, disappearing into smoke only to strike again, their presence a ghostly terror that kept the Germans on edge.
Artillery blasted from both sides, craters swallowing men and horses, sending showers of mud and stone into the air, while medics waded through the carnage, dragging the wounded into makeshift shelters, their hands slick with blood, their eyes haunted by the dead, the moans of men too far gone echoing in their ears. Hours stretched into days as the fighting ground on. The valley became a furnace of fire, mud, and fear, the screams of the fallen never ceasing, the smell of gunpowder and burning flesh a permanent haze over the battlefield. And still, the soldiers pressed forward, each step heavier than the last, each breath a battle in itself. By the time the final assault began, the Allies knew the cost would be unbearable, but retreat was impossible. Every inch gained had been bought with sacrifice, and every soldier understood that this valley, this hell, would define them forever. As the sun rose over the smoke-choked horizon, Polish, British, American, and Indian soldiers surged together, a tide of humanity against the unyielding fortress, their shouts piercing the thunder of artillery, their bodies moving as one desperate force. And in that moment, the valley itself seemed to boil with life and death, fire and blood, courage and fear, until the mountain, relentless and eternal, finally began to yield, stone by stone, bunker by bunker, inch by bloody inch, leaving behind a scarred landscape and men forever changed, haunted by the echoes of the battle, yet still alive, still moving forward, because that was all they could do in a world carved from hell and fire.
The mountain seemed alive, groaning and cracking under the relentless thunder of shells as men clawed their way up its cratered heights, boots slipping in mud and blood, rifles jammed with grime, hearts hammering as if trying to escape their chests. Above them, Monte Cassino loomed like a shattered god, its ruins smoking, walls jagged like the teeth of some ancient predator, and every step forward brought the taste of fear and iron, the screams of the dying echoing up from the valley below. Polish soldiers led the ascent, eyes narrow, bayonets fixed, dragging themselves over shattered stone, past craters filled with water and corpses, while Gurkhas moved like shadows, silent and lethal, knives flashing as they struck at German positions hidden in the rubble, grenades hurling through smoke that clung to their lungs, stinging their eyes, burning their faces. Every ruined wall, every collapsed stair was a trap. Machine gun nests opened fire without warning, sending men sprawling. Artillery shells tore through bunkers and trees alike, turning the hillside into a maelstrom of mud, fire, and screams. Medics ran through the chaos, dragging the wounded to whatever shelter remained, slipping in blood and mud, eyes wide with exhaustion, while officers shouted orders that were swallowed by the roar of war, and yet still the men climbed. Over rocks, through trenches, past shattered corpses, relentless, unyielding, knowing that each inch gained was paid in blood, every step forward a gamble with death itself. From the west, American units surged, rifles cracking, mortars lobbing shells into German positions, forcing defenders into the open only to meet another wave of Allied fire, while French and New Zealand troops flanked the mountain where the crags were steepest, climbing hand over hand through smoke, mud, and rubble, their faces etched with dirt, blood, and exhaustion, the taste of iron heavy on their tongues. Hours became days as the battle raged. Every shell, every explosion, every scream pushed the men further into exhaustion and desperation. Yet still they fought, still they climbed, because to stop meant death, and to fall behind meant being swallowed by the mountain, crushed by its fury and the precision of German snipers waiting for the slightest misstep. By the time the final push began, the top of Monte Cassino was a hellscape of twisted stone, smoke, and blood-soaked mud, every bunker a tomb, every crumbling wall a gauntlet. Yet the soldiers pressed on, bayonets flashing, rifles firing, grenades exploding, hearts pounding, lungs burning, and when the Polish corps finally reached the summit, planting their flag among the ruins, the mountain, relentless and eternal, finally seemed to sigh, releasing the valley below, leaving behind a scarred landscape,
bodies strewn like litter, and soldiers who would carry the memory of fire, smoke, and death forever, haunted, yet alive, survivors of a battle that had turned a hill into the bloodiest crucible of the Italian campaign.
Smoke hung over the battlefield like a living thing, curling through shattered walls and twisted metal, carrying the smell of burning wood, cordite, and blood, and through it soldiers stumbled and ran, dragging wounded comrades, firing blindly into the chaos, hearts hammering, lungs on fire, every breath a struggle against the suffocating haze. The valley below Monte Cassino was a shattered canvas of mud, stone, and death, craters gaping like the mouths of monsters, corpses scattered in patterns that no map could predict. And the ruined monastery above seemed to watch it all, its shattered walls a silent witness to every scream, every desperate crawl, every life lost to the mountain's relentless fury. Polish troops led the advance again, climbing over rubble, dodging sniper fire from crumbling bunkers, knives and grenades flashing in their hands as they struck German positions hidden among stones and twisted steel, while Gurkhas moved like shadows through the smoke, silent predators hunting in a maze of death, and every corner, every collapsed archway threatened to swallow a man whole. Artillery boomed from both sides, shaking the ground, sending men flying into craters filled with mud and water, and yet the soldiers pressed on, dragging stretchers, hoisting rifles over broken walls, yelling orders that were drowned by the roar of battle, fire exploding around them, shrapnel tearing flesh, the taste of iron and mud thick in their mouths. Americans surged from the west, charging through orchard after orchard, mortars raining down, while New Zealanders flanked from the east, moving through shattered trenches, their eyes red from smoke and fatigue, faces streaked with mud, blood, and sweat. Yet still they pressed on, every step a fight, every breath a gamble with death itself. Hours bled into days, the chaos unrelenting, and soldiers began to disappear into the smoke, swallowed by craters, buried beneath rubble, or cut down by unseen snipers, leaving only the screams and the mud as proof they had ever been there. Yet still, men climbed, crawled, fired, and fought, because retreat was impossible, survival uncertain, and every inch gained was carved from sacrifice. When the Polish Corps finally pushed through the last of the German defenses in this cratered, smoking hell, planting their flag atop Monte Cassino once more, the victory was raw, hollow, and monumental. The mountain had demanded blood and courage in equal measure, leaving behind a scarred landscape, haunted survivors, and a lesson burned into every man who lived through it. Monte Cassino was not a hill, not a battle, not a memory. It was hell itself, and those who survived had stared into it and climbed out alive.
Silence fell over Monte Cassino like a weight, heavy and suffocating. But it was not peace, it was the eerie stillness of a battlefield emptied of life, where mud and rubble clung to blood-soaked boots, and the air still carried the stench of smoke, cordite, and death. Soldiers moved cautiously through the ruins, dragging the wounded, counting the dead, eyes wide and haunted, faces streaked with soot and tears, realizing that the mountain had claimed more than just bodies. It had stolen innocence, hope, and the certainty that survival meant safety. Polish troops moved through the shattered corridors, stepping over broken stones and shattered relics of the ancient Abbey, their hands shaking, rifles heavy in arms that had fired thousands of rounds, hearts pounding from months of relentless assault, while medics whispered frantic prayers over men who would never stand again, their moans echoing against the crumbling walls like ghosts crying for the living. Gurkhas patrolled the edges, knives ready, checking for hidden snipers or booby traps left behind in the chaos, while Americans and New Zealanders combed the valley below, calling names, marking bodies, and trying to salvage anything from the wreckage, knowing that nothing could ever erase what had happened on this cursed hill. Craters yawned like wounds in the earth, smoke drifting lazily from smoldering bunkers, and the ruins of the Abbey rose above them like a skeleton.
sunburned and blackened, a monument to centuries of history now twisted into a tomb of mud and fire. Every man who had survived felt the mountain's weight pressing on their chest, memories of fallen comrades flashing in every shadow, every twitch of rubble, the screams still echoing in their minds as if Monte Cassino itself refused to let them go. And yet, in that silence, in the aftermath of carnage, something remarkable flickered. Courage unbroken, resilience forged in hell, and the quiet pride of soldiers who had clawed through fire, smoke, and blood to reach the summit, knowing that even though the cost was unimaginable, they had faced the mountain and survived. Monte Cassino was no longer just a battlefield. It was a testament, a scar on the earth, a reminder that bravery often comes with unimaginable loss, that heroism is carved not from glory, but from endurance, and that every man who walked away from the blood-soaked ruins carried with him the shadows, the screams, and the silent witness of history itself.
The smoke had cleared, but Monte Cassino was far from silent. The wind carried whispers of the dead, twisting through shattered walls, through craters in rubble, through the broken olive groves where once soldiers had charged into hell, and now only ghosts remained, lingering among stones and splintered beams, eyes unseen yet felt, as if the mountain itself remembered every scream, every desperate cry, every life stolen by its relentless fury. Survivors moved like shadows through the ruin, dragging stretchers, carrying rifles that felt heavier than their own bodies, hearts still hammering from months of relentless fire, mud, and blood, faces etched with exhaustion and disbelief, realizing that the battlefield was no longer measured in meters, but in memory, and every step forward was haunted by what they had seen, what they had done, and what they had lost. Polish soldiers patrolled the remains of the Abbey, picking through rubble, retrieving maps, orders, and the remnants of German positions, their fingers trembling as they touched the cold stone, knowing that the mountain had been a teacher, brutal and unyielding, and its lessons were written in blood. Gurkhas moved through tunnels that had been cleared only hours before, knives ready, scanning shadows for the last pockets of resistance, while Americans and New Zealanders combed the valley below, calling names, marking graves, and trying to carry some measure of dignity through the carnage, aware that nothing could restore what Monte Cassino had taken. Every crumbling wall, every scarred tree, every cratered slope was a testament to endurance, yet also a reminder of horror. Men spoke in whispers, shared fleeting looks of understanding, and sometimes broke down in the mud, screaming into the sky, screaming into the mountain, because grief was as heavy as the weight of the hill itself. And still, amidst the ruin, there was determination, fragile yet stubborn, letters written home on scraps of paper, small acts of care for the wounded, the silent nods of comrades who had survived together, each step forward a defiance against the mountain that had sought to crush them. Monte Cassino was more than a battlefield. It was a crucible, a monument to suffering and courage, a place where men had faced death in every form and somehow survived, carrying with them the shadows of the fallen, the memories of fire and smoke, and the hard, bitter knowledge that life itself was now measured by the inches of ground they had won and the lives they had spared.
The air smelled of smoke, wet stone, and the iron tang of blood as survivors descended from Monte Cassino, boots squelching in mud, rifles slung over shoulders, eyes haunted but scanning for the next threat. The valley below was a tapestry of craters, shattered olive groves, and the twisted remains of tanks. Yet the road to Rome lay open, a prize bought with sacrifice, carved from months of fire, death, and unrelenting struggle. Polish troops led columns down the slopes, dragging stretchers, carrying the wounded, every man aware that the mountain had tested them, broken them, and in some ways changed them forever, while American, British, New Zealand, and Indian units followed, moving as one ragged, exhausted wave through the carnage, artillery shells still cracking the distant horizon, reminding them that the enemy had not yet surrendered. Every turn of the road revealed new horrors, burned-out vehicles, abandoned rifles, the scattered remnants of soldiers who had not made it, and men moved with grim determination, silence broken only by the groans of the injured, shouted orders, and the occasional crack of distant gunfire from German rearguard positions trying to slow their advance. Officers barked commands. Medics dashed forward, dragging comrades through mud and rubble. Soldiers gritted teeth and pressed forward, knowing that the road to Rome was lined with death, and that every step, every mile was paid for in lives that would never be remembered outside these hills. Yet there was also something fragile, something defiant in the march. Letters clutched in trembling hands, brief words whispered to comrades, small acts of kindness, the refusal to let despair claim them entirely, and the shared understanding that survival was now as much about heart as it was about firepower. The mountain had given up its secrets slowly, painfully, revealing hidden tunnels, German supply caches, and strategic positions that allowed the Allies to strike forward with cautious precision. But every gain exacted a toll, and the soldiers knew it. Rome was within reach, yet the cost of every inch, every village, every road had been etched in blood, echoing in the ruined walls of Monte Cassino, carried in the haunted eyes of men who had lived through hell. And as the first distant spires of Rome glimmered on the horizon, the soldiers pressed on, tired, broken, but alive, carrying with them the legacy of fire, smoke, and sacrifice, knowing that Monte Cassino had been more than a battle. It had been a crucible that defined them, shaped them, and reminded the world that victory is never free, never clean, and always earned in the shadow of death.
The road to Rome was open, but the soldiers who had clawed, crawled, and fought their way down from Monte Cassino were no longer the same men who had begun the ascent. Their bodies were broken, faces streaked with mud and soot, hands scarred by rubble and rope burns, eyes hollow with the memory of screams that would never leave them, and yet they marched, rifles slung, stretchers in hand, hearts still hammering as if to remind them that life had not yet abandoned them. Every village they passed bore silent witness to the chaos, the shells that had torn through homes, the olive trees shattered and bleeding sap, the smoke that still curled from smoldering ruins, and every step forward carried the weight of the dead, of friends who had vanished into craters, swallowed by fire, or crushed beneath stone, leaving survivors to wrestle with the burden of living when so many had died. Officers barked orders, trying to maintain discipline, but the real battle was internal. Men whispered prayers under their breath, cursed silently at the mountain that had tested them so brutally, and stared into the sky as if seeking answers in clouds of smoke that never lifted. Polish soldiers moved methodically, clearing mines, securing tunnels, checking supply caches. Yet even their efficiency could not erase the ghosts of comrades who had fallen, the memory of faces lost forever in the mud and rubble. Gurkhas patrolled the edges, still vigilant, knives ready, while medics tried to keep the living alive, stitching wounds, comforting the dying, and offering fleeting words of hope that could not penetrate the darkness in every man's mind. The psychological battlefield was as brutal as the physical one. Fear and fatigue were constant companions, nightmares and hallucinations creeping into the minds of men who had seen too much, smelled too much, felt too much, and yet, despite it all, they moved forward, step by agonizing step, because the only alternative was surrender, and surrender had no place in the eyes of men who had stared into hell on a blood-soaked hill and survived. As they approached the outskirts of Rome, the first spires appearing above the horizon like distant beacons of salvation, every soldier knew that Monte Cassino had changed them forever. It had stripped away pretense, left only raw humanity, and carved courage, endurance, and sorrow into bones and hearts alike, leaving survivors not triumphant, not victorious, but transformed, carrying with them the eternal shadows of a battle that would haunt their minds, echo in every heartbeat, and define the very essence of what it meant to live, fight, and endure in a world forged by fire, smoke, and blood.
The smoke had lifted, the guns had fallen silent, and yet Monte Cassino did not sleep. It loomed above the valley like a scar on the earth, jagged ruins silhouetted against a blood-red sky, a monument to centuries of history and months of unrelenting death. And the men who had survived its slopes walked among the rubble as though through a graveyard that refused to bury its dead. Polish, American, British, New Zealand, and Indian soldiers moved cautiously, dragging stretchers, collecting the wounded, marking graves, their eyes hollow, faces streaked with mud and soot, hearts still hammering from months of relentless fire, smoke, and blood. Every step reminded them of the friends who had vanished, swallowed by craters, crushed beneath stone, or torn apart by machine gun fire. And yet they carried on, driven by necessity, duty, and the faint, stubborn ember of hope that life still existed beyond this inferno. The ruins themselves told stories. Tunnels carved by German defenders that had become death traps, shattered walls that had once sheltered monks, olive groves pulverized into splinters, every corner a silent witness to courage and horror alike. Medics whispered prayers over the dying, officers shouted orders through dust-choked air, and soldiers moved like ghosts through the valley, their footsteps echoing against stones soaked with centuries of history and months of war. Yet, amid the ruin, amid the horror, something remarkable endured. Defiance, resilience, and a fragile, burning pride that they had climbed the mountain, faced death, and survived. Monte Cassino had claimed tens of thousands of lives, had tested courage, endurance, and humanity itself, but it had also forged legends, etched in stone, blood and memory, soldiers who had stared into hell and refused to look away, who had carried the wounded, struck the enemy, and pressed forward when every instinct screamed to run. As the first light of dawn touched the ruins, reflecting off broken walls and cratered slopes, the survivors stood in silence, eyes fixed on the horizon, where Rome lay open, conquered not by strategy alone, but by the unyielding will of men who refused to die in vain. Monte Cassino was no longer just a hill, a battle, or a memory. It was a testament to human endurance. A cathedral of courage built in mud, blood, and fire, and its echoes would ripple through history, a reminder that even in the darkest crucibles of war, humanity could survive, endure, and rise scarred but unbroken, carrying the stories of the fallen and the living alike into the pages of legend. And as the wind whispered through the ruins, dust and smoke mingling in the morning light, one truth remained clear. Monte Cassino had not only shaped the course of a campaign, it had carved courage into every man who had set foot on its slopes, leaving behind a legacy that would never fade, a story of fire, blood, and the enduring spirit of those who had climbed into hell and survived.